So let me now that you brought up Genesis, one of the questions that's not on the list that I do get asked from time to time: are there some medical conditions that deal with like anxiety, depression, ADD or ADHD? Are those like permanent disqualifying conditions in the past that cannot apply for SF, or is it depend on their history and whatever?
That's a great question. For medical processing, waivers are not tied to MOSs. So the Special Forces contract is not limited by medical conditions per se. What you will find in candidates and speaking to the population out there, when you're bringing up, you got to, number one, be transparent about your medical history. There's nobody can help you. Your recruiter, myself, Nick cannot help you unless you're transparent with your medical history when you start processing for enlistment. When you're talking about specific medical conditions, there are timeframes usually associated with the last time you were treated for the condition versus when the National Guard is going to consider a waiver for you for enlistment. The longest waiting period that we have from just like my quick knowledge on that is probably going to be related to anxiety and depression. That's also going to be considered is what other comorbid conditions came with it. So if you were diagnosed with anxiety, you were treated for X amount of time, but you might have had some other issues that came with it. Sometimes self-harm comes up, psychiatric holds, other types of treatment or issues might come into play with that. And they're going to take that into consideration when they're looking at how soon they're going to consider a waiver to be approved as part of that process. Right. We already know everybody in today's society has been hit with ADD, ADHD diagnosis, right? It's very, very common. That one's the shortest and probably the easiest waiver to get medically. It's a year waiting period to be considered for a waiver for ADD, ADHD. As long as I get everything I need for my applicants and you get Nick what he needs to process you, it's going to be really quick to get you in as long as that threshold.
So if I understood you correctly, aside from the normal recruiting protocols of waiting periods of 12 to 36 months, depending on if it's depression, anxiety, ADD, ADHD, and their mild to minor history, you're saying that it's just a normal medical waiver process and it's not factored into the decision-making process through your leadership or your checklist of eligibility for SF, correct?
That's correct. Yep. Yeah, there's no additional processing with the 18 series medically. The only thing that's going to be required at that point, and this is where our office has to, we've got a really great system down for this. When you process at MEPS and you have a medical waiver, which I think they did the last poll that I saw from the MEPS guidance counselors here in Denver was about 80% of the applicants that are enlisting and getting contracts require a medical waiver. So between usually like 60 to 80%, some type of medical waiver. Your shoulder popped out of place 10 years ago, that's a history of an unstable shoulder, you're going to get a disqualification for it, and you're going to get a waiver. It's a really quick one, but it's still a waiver. In order for you to go to an 18 X-ray contract, you have to go to airborne school. If you have a medical waiver with your enlistment, you cannot take an airborne physical at MEPS. And that's a big one. So our office has to process an exception of policy for an airborne physical at time of enlistment. So you're going to get your enlistment contract, but you do not have your airborne physical done, and you have to get an approval to have that happen. And that is only granted by the schoolhouse at Fort Liberty. That'll say, yeah, he's good to go, and you'll get your airborne physical at Fort Moore prior to attending airborne school.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that, because I've spoken to like a couple of active duty recruiters that are obviously more experienced in airborne contracts, because New York definitely does not have any. And I remember him telling me that exactly what you said, that because it's airborne, they can't have any medical waivers. So SF was closed off for that. And with SF being a high stress and job skill or a career path, that having not ADD, but anxiety and depression in your past would close that opportunity for you. So I don't know if that's an active duty thing or if it's just Army wide. Maybe that recruiter just didn't want to take the next extra steps per se to get that person in.
I think that's a great call out. I think there's certain cases where, from our experience, applicants might come to our office because other offices have turned them away. They're not able to work certain waivers. They're not ready to work certain waivers. They do something else in processes. It's just what happens. There's also isms, right? We already know. Like, hey, my buddy told me, buddy told him that I can't enlist as an 18 X-ray because I've got a medical waiver. And he heard that from an active duty recruiter or a National Guard recruiter 10, 15 years ago. Things change, processes change, and it's hard to keep up with those processes. The office that we work out of, that we built here, we try to stay as up to date as we can here on the most current processes, and that is where the experience for our applicants really make a difference, because they know they come in and we're getting some of the most up-to-date information in regards to eligibility of applicants to be able to enlist into an 18 series contract.
If you got something out of this and you like this part of the excerpt of the video, be sure to check out the full version right here. Team Swartz signing out.